All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel or to the podcast if you're listening to this. And today we have a special episode where we are going to do something that I should have done a long time ago. And that is break down what I mean when I say ambient control and room tone, other people call it. There's a lot of different ways you can talk about it. I'm going to say, and I'm going to show you, hopefully, the way that I do it and why I do it that way. And yes, it's not technically correct and people will look down at you and gaffers will probably disown you and talk badly behind your back. But in the end, what we're trying to do is give you more control. Now, the important part about giving you more control as a cinematographer is if you are good at cinematography, which means you understand the concepts and you can action those concepts on set, the more time and resources that you were given on set, if you get better results with more time and more resources, this should improve the final images, or this should improve your control over the final images, which would then lend itself to better results. Right? If you are a fantastic cinematographer and you don't have a lot of time or resources, your impact on the final image is going to be less. If you are not very good at cinematography and you lack all of the control, also probably not going to be very good. But if you're not very good, we want to give you maximum control and maximum time to experiment and to be wrong so that you can then course correct with the people around you who might actually know something about cinematography. We want to give you the maximum amount of time. And that's what I'm doing all of the time. That's what I'm thinking about all of the time. In pre-production, while I'm on set, I'm thinking to myself, I'm not very good at cinematography. So how can I give myself the longest runway before we have to hit the record button and we have to move on in order to make the day and to get the schedule all worked and not have anybody panic or, lose their minds over us being behind by an hour because I want to get just the right level of detail in a shot. That's generally not going to happen on a commercial, or I wouldn't want to put myself in that position. So how do I get around that? I am going to look for little controls of things that take a long time to adjust, and I'm going to try and plan accordingly for those. And that's where we are going to talk about ambient, room tone, especially on location, when you are shooting on location and shooting interiors. And a lot of times you think, oh, room tone and location work, it's probably going to be, you could do nighttime exterior stuff. It's like because you have to set your level of exposure to the ambient that is on the street lights or that is coming from whatever sources you are using outside. The easiest thing to do if you're working with a large area is to set the level on the camera, set the exposure to the things that you cannot control. If you set that level to what is desirable and you think, these street lights, they look best if I'm at a 2.8 as opposed to a 2, because then at 2, it's too bright, and 2.8, it's just the right level of darkness. And then I can add my key on top of that because it's such a large area. That's normally what you're thinking. Here today, we're going to be talking about how to use room tone and how to use ambient inside of a location when you're working interiors, because I think that is the time that I have had the most success with this setup. And it's one setup where you would think, it seems like it's not necessary. It seems like you could get every other contributing factor right or in the right spot versus doing what I'm about to show you. Because what I'm about to show you is an extra step. I'm just saying it's in your best interest to action this extra step every single time you're on location, because you will have more control. If you have more control, hopefully that leads to better results. Before we do that though, this week, this is the only week, once a year, I put the advanced cinematography courses on sale. This is the only week for the entire year. You now have 7 days. The window is open for enrollment for people that want to enroll in advanced cinematography location lighting. In this course, this is not like I show you 1 or 2 different things that I do on every single job. No, I take you through from start to finish on an entire commercial production that is location based. So it's not studio based, it's not exterior. This is interior location jobs. We shoot the boards, we go on the location scout, we go on the tech scout, we go on the actual shoot itself. And this is all done in a virtual environment. So we have as much time as we need for me to break down what I'm doing at every single step of the process. If you've never been a cinematographer before and you get hired to shoot a commercial and you want to know how do other people do it, this is every single decision, every single talk, every single conversation that I have with every department for any location-based commercial. I have put it in this course. That's why it's advanced. We don't go over what ISO is. We don't go over what f-stop is. We don't go over any of those things. All we're doing the entire time is I take you through every single decision that I make on a job, and you track alongside, and I explain why I do those things and why I do it in the order that I do it, and why we look for certain things on the tech scout, and what we communicate with the team, and then how we action things on the day to be able to get maximum control so that we can get the images that we like, or that I can get the image that I like. Now remember, the best part about any of this stuff, because there's only a limited number of paths that you can choose in cinematography, if you don't like the thing that I do, if you don't like the look that I end up with, all you have to do is do the opposite of that, right? There's only so many ratios that we are tracking. No matter how complicated you want to make cinematography, there's only so many different things that we need to keep track of that ultimately affect the feel and the look of the final image. Right? Apart from the obvious things like the physical location that you're in, or the lenses that you're on, or the camera that you've chosen, really the big things that make a difference are the ratios. What's the key to fill? What's the key to background? Those are the ratios that you are tracking. If you don't like the things that I do, or the angles of light that I use, or where it comes from, or the rules that I like to look for, or the key traits that I think that's something that I'm drawn towards, all you have to do is do the opposite. I can tell you, even if you were to completely change the look that I go for in the advanced cinematography course, at the end of the commercial when we're actually on set shooting it, and you see us change lenses and change ratios and all those things, you can do all of that the exact opposite way that I would do it. Still, 95% of the decisions that I make in the course, you would be making them the exact same way, right? You'd still be talking to crew at certain times. You'd still be talking to the director at certain times. You'd still be looking for references at certain times. Just because it changes the look, that changes very little about the actual job. And that is what the benefit of the course is. We can take all the time in the world. I think it's 6 hours or something, where we go over every single decision and everything that you should be aware of at a given stage of production, and things to look out for, and things that you can, productions can take advantage, or you can take advantage of productions, or crew members can be slack, or you can be on the ball. All of these things we discuss in this course. This is the only week that I allow it to be open, because if I allow it to be open the entire time, people who are brand new to cinematography will think that this is the course that's going to teach them what ISO is, and this is absolutely not that. The only way that you should enroll in this course is if you can make the money back that it took to buy the course, if you can make it back in half a day on set on your next job, right? That's the only way that I would invest the time or the energy into this course. Is you are the person who is just on the cusp of saying, I am breaking into the commercial space. I want to know how efficient I can be on set, and what are the decisions that I should be making before, and what am I leaving on the table by looking at how someone else is doing it, right? This is definitely not the only way that you can go about approaching commercials and then shooting commercials. It's just the way that I do it. I haven't seen anyone else release something on this level of detail on how they work and the interactions that they have beforehand, but this is my attempt. So if you're interested, the link will be in the description below, and yeah, it's 7 days before it is closed for the year and not to be had again. Okay, let's jump into room tone here. What am I talking about when I say room tone or ambient? Why would it be beneficial? Because this was often thought as like a faux pas back in the day of normal people. You think, well, if we need room tone or ambient, we're just going to blast level into the roof. Okay, you're just going to put level into the roof, and then that spreads the light all over the place, and you get light where it wasn't before. So in this example, right, we are looking at a lady. She's sitting in a chair, and there's a guy standing up next to her. And the problem here, for the amount of level that is in the room, is that we are looking at the window that should be lighting the scene. And if we were to think through something like the framework, ideally you would want like the window that was actually lighting the scene over here. That way we didn't have to hold that window. It could add a lot more level, and then that would give us our key light, and then we could shape the shadows how we wanted. Here we're so wide that we can't do that, right? You can't bring in a whole bunch of neg here because you'd be able to see it. Another time that you're going to want to focus on ambient is when you're so wide that you can't control anything, right? If we were just doing a tight of this guy, well, we wouldn't be so concerned about getting ambient in the space. Right? Now, let's talk about what lights are actually involved in this image, and then we'll see the value of what I think is making sure that you have some ambient control in every single setup that you shoot. Not to say that you will be using it, but the time saved when you do need it versus the waste of, the 10 minutes that it takes to set this thing up in every single spot. When you do ultimately need it, it will be worth it. Even if you don't use it for 90% of the setups on the day, when you do need it, it's there. It's something that's super easy to control, and I'll show you why in a second. Okay, so for this scene, what's the issue? The issue is back here is the window that we are lighting from. And I think for reference, this was just ambient daylight in the background. So you've got a sheer or a curtain on the background, right? And that is lighting up this space. Then over here we have, well, I think this is like a 4K or something, and it's slashing through, and we've got the soft hob look across her lap. And that's what's giving us this key light just here. There's probably something else over here, like an octabox or something, that is pushing level. So you got light coming through the door. You've got light pushing at her. We've got no neg in the space because we would be able to see it here in this shot, which is no good. Now, with these setups, what are the things that we are controlling? Right? Let's count the number of control points that we have. We have, well, one, the 4K, the back level, and the octabox, and then just where we set the camera in terms of exposure. Like, are there sunglasses on the lens, right? Are we using ND filters? We set the ambient, which is really, in this case, we're really setting to what we want. What's the hardest thing to control? And that is this back giant portion of the image, this sliding glass door that is behind this couple. Okay, that's the biggest thing. So immediately when I land, I'm thinking, what's going to take the most amount of time and energy to change and manipulate? Number one, can we manipulate it in any way? Sometimes you can't, which is like my night exterior example that I brought up before. You just can't. You don't have the resources to be able to change out every single globe and like set a moon box or something like that. So you're going to want to set to the hardest thing to control. And in this case, we decide it is the thing behind these two people. Okay, so that's where you place the camera where you want it. You look through the little eyepiece, right? You're not like guessing at levels of ND unless you're working with like a Venice or something that has built-in NDs that you can just cycle through. You're just going with the aperture on the lens, no matte box, no nothing. You just put your eye through the eyepiece and you close down or open up until this thing that is super hard to control looks the way that you think you want it to look. And as soon as you get there, you say, okay, let's see if I'm in this room and that is reading a T8, right? But I know I want to be shooting at wide open. So I want to be shooting, let's say I'm shooting at T2. Okay, so I know how many stops of ND am I going to have to put in front of the lens in order to get this where I want it. If I know it looks good at T8 on the lens, right? Well, I got to get 5.6, 4, 2.8, 2s. I need 4 stops of ND in front of the lens to set my base exposure. Like this is the level that we're going for look, right? Because I know I'm going to be lighting from inside. So I'm not worried about the levels here at the moment. I'm not worried about the levels here. I'm worried about overall levels, right? And level of the thing that is the hardest to control. That's the very first step. So you land, boom, look through the eyepiece. Okay, looks good at 8s. I know I want to be shooting at 2, 4 stops. So let's put in a 1.2 in front of the lens. You put that 1.2 in front of the lens, and then we start building. Like we know, we've talked on the tech scout, and we've talked with the gaffer and the director. Everyone's decided, okay, we're going to light through this thing. We're going to have these doors open over here. We're going to soft hob across the body and make it a little bit interesting. And we're going to get this here, this face. If we zoom in, can we zoom in? We can't. We can make it bigger though, can't we? And let's come up here, make it even bigger again so we can actually see what we're looking at here. Okay, this ratio, right? Right here, this side of the face, this key side of the face, which is the same side that the key light is coming from over here. I want that if I'm at T2 on the camera, remember for this background, then I want this to read T2, right? I want to be just at key, maybe tiny little bit under because you can boost it up later, but maybe just a little tiny bit under so I can control that. Now I know and you should know it too, that if you are lighting from inside like this, and if you're inside of a location and you have 4 stops of ND on the lens, you're probably going to be able to push enough level, unless you're super wide, to get this reading pretty much wherever you want it, right? You're going to have enough level to start affecting things. But for our purposes here, let's imagine that, okay, we could control this. We could get this ratio or this level exactly where we want it, right? Level-wise. Now, the problem is if we're using again, let's say we're using an M40 over there, 4K HMI inside. Would we be using a 4K? Maybe not, right? Maybe like an M18 or something. Let's say we're using an M18. This is not dialed in the LED world where you're just able to get the exact 1% things, right? Like we're roughing it in. And this is the point of ambient control, which will come in a second. If we're roughing it in, once you rough everything in, then that comes down to the normal. Usually I say you get 7 minutes after everything is roughed in. No matter how much time you have to prepare for a shot, you've got 7 minutes once everybody's in place, that everyone, like all the lighting guys or girls, they're all standing next to the lamps. They're all ready to make changes. You get 7 minutes after it's roughed in to start to finesse. So you don't want to waste those 7 minutes. And you think, oh, well, again, let's say this is an M18 and we want this, half a stop down, right? It's roughed in place. Maybe it's a little bit closer than we thought it was going to be, or maybe something's a little bit different and it's just half a stop over, right? Are we going to drop a wire? Are we going to use a net? There's lots of different solutions we can take to get there. But is it the best use of our time? Is it the fastest use of our time? Maybe, but also maybe not. Okay, so if we have, let's just say we set up that M18, we roughed it in, okay, it's in the world, right? You don't like rough it in and leave it 4 stops over or something like that. You get it in the ballpark. But we know we have other lamps to add inside. And as we add other lamps, that's going to start to pollute shadows. It's going to start to pollute our key with more level. So let's get everything in a rough place at the beginning, and then we'll manipulate at the very end. So here, that would be, okay, let's get our sky panel or a vortex through an octabox to act as like a wrap from the same side. So we got key coming through here, and then we've got wrapping octabox. Okay, and then we sort of rough that in. Now that's LED, so we can dim it down much, much quicker than everything else. So that's probably something that we don't have to get anywhere near as close to rough ready as this light that's out this door. But as soon as we do, okay, now we move on to the ratios aren't all matching up. Like this back here to the shadow side of her face that we're trying to sort of wrap towards, there's some discrepancies as to what I would like to see in my mind versus what is actually there. Okay? And probably the easiest thing to get right is the ratio between the M18 and the octabox. Right? Because we can, depending on how wide you are, of course, you can move that in and you can dial it down percentage-wise. Okay, so this is easy to get matched up. What isn't easy is the background to this. Right? Like say, oh, it's just not filling the room as much. Maybe we can't get far enough back. Maybe we don't have enough power. Like everywhere else, it's starting to look a little bit theatrical and staged because this ratio to over here, like all over the place, it's looking just a little bit down. It's not matching up, which makes it look lit. That is the one ratio. If you screw up, if you're constantly like, why are my shots, they all feel lit. They all feel like there's a light just off to the side here. It's because the key isn't matching the ambient inside the rest of the room. You got to make it feel like, oh, realistically, there could be a reason that the level is this high on her face. We're saying that, oh, I don't know, there's another window over here or something. It's a little bit hot on the ground down there. We would want to try and clean that up. But realistically, like there could be an excuse to have this much level inside the room. Now, again, well, as we're sitting here talking about this, we've just been talking about this for the last 10 minutes. You don't get 10 minutes to talk about this on set. Like everyone's moving around you. Right? You are not in a vacuum. There are people who want to go. There's the first AD, there's producers, there's directors, there's everybody who's like, come on, let's get going. We don't have all day to make these adjustments. So if we wanted to change, say we didn't like the ratio between the M18 and the background. Okay, say we're at full power on the M18. We can't get any more power out of it. What are we going to do? Well, we could, there's lots of different things you could do out the back. You could put a net over this entire thing. You could put ND gel on the windows back there. There's lots of different ways that you could stop if this is too hot, to make this not as hot, okay? But as you make this not as hot, maybe that starts to cut down on the actual ambient in the room, right? Maybe you end up shooting yourself in the foot because you liked what was going on the shears, but then it wasn't giving off enough level inside of the room, and that was what was giving the gag away. So what do? What is the answer? The answer is, if we scroll down here, I'll show you an example of this. Ta-da! You put a giant light into the roof. Now this is where older cinematographers and newer cinematographers that think this way would be going like, this is the ultimate Like you've given in. You've given in. The images are about to get very, very average when you start putting lights into the ceiling. It's just like, oh, we're out of time. We're out of every other option. We didn't nail all of our ratios. And it's true. If you don't nail all of your, if you nail all your ratios, you don't need this, right? If it like sets up perfectly and you balance this, you balance the octabox, you balance whatever's back here, you throw on the practical in the corner here, you haze it up just a little bit, like it's all, in theory, it should all fall really nicely. The problem is that happens, even if it only happens, if it happens half of the time, that's a large amount of time to absolutely nail every single setup. Because every time you adjust one of these lamps, right? Every time you adjust one of these areas of the frame, let's be as optimistic as you can and say that takes 2 minutes every change, right? Well, 2 minutes exploring every ratio. You're never going to do this back thing in 2 minutes, right? But that eats up a lot of your 7 minutes is seeing one adjustment. And as much as I have a Rolodex in my mind of the different ratios that I want to see, in every given location, there's going to be things that are a little bit off. It's like, oh, we're getting cut. Some light is getting cut, or the quality is not the same, so we have to soften it off even more, which means that's going to remove level. Like things come up along the way that are going to affect what I thought in my head was going to be the ratios versus what's there in real life. Like in this example, maybe in the background, we're not lighting this up. This is just ambient daylight. Well, if it goes overcast, then we've got a problem. You're like, well, you should have thought of that problem. Yes, we should have, except that would cost the production 10 times as much money because now we would have to be lighting up out here. We'd have to have a generator big enough to do that. We'd need the lamp out there, that ups the day rate. And maybe there was no talk of that on the Tech Scout. Like there's lots of different ways that you would not be in a position to just overcome this with firepower. Okay. And that's the situation that we're imagining. When you are in that situation, what you can do is you put ambient into the room. Now, this used to be a pain, a giant pain. Why? Because you lacked control. Like imagine before this little LED source 4 thing that is parked just over here and is shining up into this room, and you're using the blades to cut it into a very tiny little box. Before that, this was a nightmare to do. And this took a huge amount of time to manipulate and to cut the spread of. And that was why, at least in my mind, that's when I was first coming up. I thought the reason that you wouldn't do this all the time is because the 50% of the time that you don't use it, it's just not worth the time that you're taking away from all the other resources on set, either from the crew or from other lights that we could have been putting up in the meantime. Nowadays, it's super simple. Nowadays, it's one LED with a spotlight fixture on it. That's it. Put it on the ground, you blast it up into the ceiling, and then if you don't need it, you just turn it off. You don't even turn it on until you absolutely need it. And then when you realize, oh man, something is grossly wrong here. And I'm talking about grossly wrong between the hardest thing to fix, which is the ratio between everywhere that you aren't actually looking and the key area. Okay, if you're not happy with that, that's the thing that takes the longest to change. So, and normally, at least myself, I find that the key to fill ratio is it's hard to screw that up. You can get pretty close. And then if you're not clipping the hardest thing in the image here, which is that background, again, that's pretty hard to screw up too, because we did that at the very start. Like that's the first thing we make sure we're not screwing up something that is the hardest to overcome. So those two things we've knocked out. What the one problem is light everywhere else that we weren't planning for, but that it's just very hard to manipulate. And what do you do in that scenario? You blast the level into the ceiling. And in the ceiling, ta-da, it just naturally like falls onto the rest of the scene. And sometimes it doesn't naturally fall. Like if you look at the background back here, this thing is lit up. Over here, these shears, they are lit up. Now, would they normally be lit up if we go back to the full image? Like, is it weird that there's this light up here? Yes. How would we get rid of that if we were in like a perfect world? Well, on the back of this, like back in the old days when this had to be like a lighting fixture that you would have to put like on a wall buster. You put wall busters up here, and then you put like an 8x8, and then you would flag the back of it so as not to let light hit that back wall. Okay, that's like your David Fincher House of Cards. On a set, you wouldn't even have a ceiling. right? You would have like the edges of the ceiling, and then here you would have a 20 by 20 of full grid, and you would just drop a tiny, just the smallest little bit of ambient. So it just naturally like falls just ever so softly on their head, and you can't tell where it's coming from, and you don't know which source is bouncing to create that ambient. It's just like, oh, it's just there. And that's a good thing because it makes it look, it just sits a little bit nicer. Well, that's the sacrifice of doing it as fast as you possibly can for as cheap as you can. Like the ability to be able to do this little light outweighs, oh, it's a little bit brighter back there. First of all, we can just take it down in the grade. It's 2 seconds to take down in the grade. And if you're moving, it's slightly different, but it's a super, super easy fix. So now where is this idea of ambient into the ceiling the most helpful? It's the most helpful in a scenario exactly like this, which is why I chose the still, where there's no other way. It's physically impossible to light up the rest of the room any other way, right? We would have to do it through our base exposure. Because if we pumped more level, like say we wanted more level on the wall over here, where is it going to come from? We could put maybe another lamp out here and like shine it into the walls, but that would be weird and strange because we're going for like a very directional look here. Let's come back to the actual still here. What other way could we get more level in here? We could light up the shears, again, more, but that makes the shears hotter. And as a result of that, we're probably going to ND down, which then defeats the whole purpose of getting ambient in here. Now, we added haze. That's another way that you can get ambient into the shadows, basically, because you're just giving it that little bit of like a low contrast lift, which then generally, sometimes you'll find that that's enough to then be able to pull those ratios apart in the grade. It's like if you lift with a little bit of haze, that lifts the shadows, just giving you a little bit of detail in there, and then you can pull. And when I say pull, I mean like the difference between his key side and his shadow side. You can really stretch that if you've got just a little bit more information in that shadow. But there's really no other way to do it. Now, if you don't do this, the problem is that you then have to change all of the ratios. You're still not going to get this look. Even if you adjust all the ratios we just talked about, you would have to find some other look for this space. And we don't want to do that. And you especially don't want to do that after you've sold, this is going to be the look. And we've gotten, without this room tone up here, say that this space, we're 95% of the way there. And there's nothing worse than being 95% of the way there, where if you're 95% of the way on a commercial job and everyone is staring at the monitor and you're like, actually, it's going to take like 10 minutes. We're just going to do some adjusting. Everyone's like, it looks fine. No one else cares about the last 5%. You're probably the only person that cares about the last 5%. Now that's a good sign because that means you care about the image and you care about the work that you're doing. Congratulations to you. But it's a bad sign because if you take the 10 minutes and it's still not working because of all the reasons that we just talked about, everyone's just gonna be like, okay, it's fine. We tried. Like, just do it. And then in my experience, what has happened is you'll lift the image and something will be too hot because you've compromised on the safety side of things. You haven't gone, very rarely do people go too hard. And you're like, oh, that's it. I'm just going to go dark and down. I'm going to lean into that more than I'm going to lean into like, oh my God, I think I've overcooked it. And then when you go on for the close-up, then you're going to have to match to that level. And if you don't match to that level, then it's going to be much harder in the grade. Questions will be asked. It's just not a good vibe. But if you can just pump a little bit of level into the ceiling and let it gracefully fall. Has everybody done their job on set to craft the perfect image without any cheating? No. But also, we're cheating with every single thing that we do. We're always, none of this is natural, right? This isn't this old lady's house. They don't know each other. None of this furniture was actually there. It's all artificial. So what? We put a little bit of light in the roof. Who cares? It's super fast. And it's like a get out of jail of like, oh, I just need a little bit of something. Now, why is it bad? I wouldn't say bad, but it's not, I wouldn't advocate using it all the time because it's another variable that isn't natural that's easy to screw up. Okay? So again, if we take a look, I should have put these two stills together. If we take a look here, when you walk into somebody's house, like it might, maybe there is a window over here. It might look like this, right? It might look like this. I'll tell you what you'll never see in somebody's house. Nobody has an LED shining into the ceiling. And because nobody has an LED shining into the ceiling, that is not associated with looking natural. So what you can do is you can screw it up. The more variables you add, because we've now got background ratio, which is taken care of by the shears. We've got inside, we've got the M18, we've got the wrap. Now I've got 3 things plus the haze that I'm trying to keep track of and balance in my mind and see when I'm diagnosing problems, or not problems, issues before I want to hit roll. It's like, oh, I've got these 3 things that I can all manipulate. Which one requires the most attention now that is going to have the highest impact on the final image? Well, if I add another variable, that is just sucking time and energy away from potential other fixes. And it's also something that I can easily screw up. This is like, instead of using a passive bounce outside, you decide you're going to use an 18K or an M90. It's like, yeah, you can do that. But the problem is you can screw that up. You can screw that, whereas screwing up a bounce, right? To make a bounce feel unnatural, unless it's like a lame or something, to make a ultra bounce feel unnatural outside, you have to be in the shot with the bounce to make it feel strange. It's like if the bounce is out of the shot, given the field of view of the lens, if the bounce is out of the shot, it's almost not going to return too much light than you would normally think is natural. So here, if we have this thing, it's always a temptation to just go like, oh, maybe a little bit more. And then you're like, you're listening to somebody that says, you should always expose to the right. And you're like, maybe we'll give it a little bit more. And in the grade, they'll pull it down. And they never pull it down in the grade, right? It's always going to be way, way, way leveled up. So what this is a huge time saver in terms of you controlling the image. That's all this is for. This isn't for anybody else. This isn't for the grips. This isn't for the electrics. This isn't for the director. This level, this is just for you, your special little trick. Why? Because as you get closer and closer to going, okay, yes, to the first AD, we're ready to roll. Like, let's do it. I'm done making changes. It's our time now, or it's your time now to take over. This thing doesn't require anyone else except you to make a huge difference to the image. Pen got really big there. This thing I can just walk over, right? This is almost like using a 4x floppy if you're shooting the close-up here, right? If you use a 4x floppy over here, I can just walk over, grab it, and like open it up a little bit, or maybe I can close it off a little bit, and I can just see the immediate effects. Super fast, super intuitive, like, oh, I bring it closer, it gets darker. I put it farther away, it gets lighter. Which do I like the best? Oh, I like this one. Same here. It's like, let me just A/B it on and off, and then let me just dial in the exact right amount, right? This isn't tungsten anymore. It's not like a Joker inside of a Source 4 that you poke up here anymore where, okay, now we got to wire it, or we got to find some other way. We got to flag it off or do something. None of that. Like, this thing solves problems in 60 seconds. Now, there are a couple of different ways you can use it well, and you can screw it up and make it harder on yourself. And probably the easiest thing to remember when you're using this ambient is I would never, ever, 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 if I could get away with it, and usually I can't think of a time where you couldn't get away with it, I would never have this bounce between myself, the camera, and the talent, right? This space, this is sacred space. I don't want any top light in here. I want it behind the subject. Okay, so if we come over here to a top-down view, here's the lady sitting down. Here's the camera looking this way. This is me. Camera's pointing this way, right? I want the top light over here. I want the ambient light over here. I do not want it in here. Why? Because I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself not to go too much ambient. Like, I feel much safer if it's behind the person. So then you get like just that little bit extra on the hair or on the shoulders, as opposed to filling in all of our hard work from the shape. Like, I want to keep the shape. I just want to slightly lift the ambient. I just want to slightly lift the room tone. And if I can do that in less than 60 seconds, even better, if I tell the entire team beforehand, hey, every time we do an interior location setup every time. Please have this thing on standby. Like, please have it plugged into the wall. Please have it on a little tiny stand that I can just fly in, shoot it up, and test it. And you know what would be even better is if you could actually aim it. Aim it, put it in place, find a spot for it, aim it, don't turn it on. Let me work with all of our normal levels. If we have a fairy tale of a day, well, then I don't have to use it. But if I just need a little bit of something, and everyone else, because this isn't like another reality when you're not shooting by yourself in your house and you have all the time in the day to test different levels and different ratios. It's like this would have taken, I don't know, say there was 3 in lighting that day. So you got 1, 2, 3 different sources that we're going for, plus the prac, that's 4. Those people might have moved on to the next setup as you get closer and closer and closer. Like maybe the gaffer sends some of the electricians off to do something else or to prep another scene or something like that. So now as we're starting to adjust and manipulate, now instead of having a team of 3, now you've got a team of 1. And if you have to make 2 adjustments, now that's taken that person, instead of 2 minutes, it's now taken 5 minutes. And one person working for 5 minutes while 30 people stand around, the math starts to get a little bit skewed. Okay, so just a little bit of prep of saying, hey, have this thing ready. Have that little ambient thing ready all of the time. That's it. It's not that hard. So another example here, just to drive this point home, of when I would use this is this clip here. This is almost the exact same scenario where out here, I don't think we've actually looked at this. We haven't broken down this scene on the podcast or on the channel before, but father and son talking, right? We've got shears blocking up the window that we're lighting from, when in fact we're lighting from over here, which is the shears just end right here. And then the rest of this window, there's a 4K out here and it's shining through here. It's hitting inside. It's hitting a 4x frame, which is softening off on the face. And then back here, this is au naturel, right? That's the 4K from out there. Inside, we've got neg running down this way, cutting off all of the light. We've got a little bit of haze. And there is no wrap from inside here, okay? So there's no octabox because this is a darker, the ratios are gonna be a little bit further apart here versus something like the grandma scene because we want it a little bit darker. Now, let's say, oh, it's too dark. It's too dark now. We could either go out and manipulate the 4K in like very crude increments, or we could just blast that LED from over here into the roof behind these two, and just ever so slightly lift in here. And maybe we, you know, if you just pull up the neg a little bit to let in a little bit in here, it's just like, just a little bit of illumination brings this value closer to this value. And it does it very quickly. And most importantly, you can do it all by yourself, right? You just go over to the light source, you dial up or you dial down. That's it. Speed, control. And again, control is good if you know what you're looking for. Control doesn't help if you have terrible taste, or if you don't know what you're looking for, or if you don't know that, well, that what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get this ratio and this ratio to a better place. If you're just like, oh, what I need is, it just doesn't look that good. Let's shine a light into the ceiling and see if that makes it better. That's not a good plan. Right? That's not the plan that you want to take. Or maybe you want it, I don't know, moody or something, whatever's happening. You know, like this, you have to know exactly why you're doing this. I would just say that if you are working in a commercial space where you can have the opportunity to have this thing on standby, there's no reason not to. Again, it used to be like a faux pas where you would be looked down upon for saying, oh, really, we're going to do like light into the ceiling? But sometimes it works. Now, is it a variable that you can screw up? Absolutely. Do I want to screw things up? No. But do I know that I am going to screw things up, or that the ratios just aren't going to fall? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you're working with people that are slightly slower than the people that you would normally be working with. So maybe your 7 minutes turns into 3 minutes, and maybe the ratios that they have put. Again, because you are not manipulating everything by hand in a big team, right? You have to communicate that to other people around you. And maybe you say, you know, there's not the difference between the key and the background. It's not small enough, right? It's just a little bit too stretched. So do you think we can fix that? And then maybe they come up with an idea and you're like, yeah, that maybe it will work. Try it. And then they try it and it doesn't work, or it just doesn't look as good, or they misheard, or the communication has somehow gone astray. And really, all you really want is just like, let's just bring it up a little bit, like the whole thing. Let's just bring it all up a little bit. You're like, well, we could just open up on the lens, but that's not the same thing as just bringing up the ambient in the background versus the key. And those are the things that, like, there's only so many things that you're looking to nail in a shot, at least that I'm looking to nail in a shot. I want the key to fill. Key to fill is the easy one. It's the key to background that is the hard one. The key to background is the big one. And usually when you're this far along, as in you've set everything up, there's really no way that you can manipulate the background, which leaves you only the key. And there's only so many things you can do to the key. And if you're lighting from outside, which would 100% might be my suggestion, why do you light from outside in the first place? Because it's harder to screw up. It's really easy to screw up if you're lighting this with a little aperture 120D just inside here. It's really easy to screw that up because it looks like there's a light shining inside, which isn't natural. The natural thing to do is throw a lamp outside and let it be shaped by the window itself. And you're like, you can't screw it up that bad. The light has to come from out there, so it has to look sort of natural to begin with. And it's like, okay, well then we can't change anything inside, or it takes a long time to change those things. If there's a change that takes 15 minutes to get nailed, or if there's a change that we can do in 60 seconds, I say err on the side of changing things in 60 seconds because it is a race. And it's one thing, and it's not even one thing. If you're working on, your childhood best friend is your director and you guys have been thinking about writing this or doing this film project for your entire lives, you still have to make the day. No matter how much you've prepped or set up for this is going to be the look, sometimes the ratios just don't match. And sometimes you're going to have to make very, very quick changes. This just gives you maximum control. I want maximum control. Even if I don't exercise that control, I want to set myself up, especially when it is not cost prohibitive to do it. Like one LED with a Source 4 attachment inside, that's enough for a scene. I mean, this isn't that wide, but there's not a lot of interior on location in a house jobs where you're going to be wider than this. I forget what we were on, but let's say this is like a 27, right? This is probably a 27. There's not a lot of time where you're going to be on an interior where it's wider than this and you have less control. So in that circumstance, what's a way that we can win some of that control back? Oh, we just put a light in the ceiling. And then we don't have it at 100%. We have it at 5%. And it's just that little something. And then you flick it on and off and everyone's looking at the monitor going like, I don't see it. And you go like, okay, nobody cares about you seeing it. I see it. I see it. It makes it look better to me. And it hasn't cost us anything. So now we are ready to roll. And that's it. So I would say if you want to increase the chances of you getting images that you're actually happy with, try to position yourself to be in control of every single element inside of the frame. And this goes opposite. And this is probably why I like cinematography in the first place. Like that's the fun of it, is if I have control of everything, do I still screw it up? And unfortunately, for a long time, the answer was yes, I would still screw it up and I wouldn't be happy with things. But the more that you do it, the more you start to practice and hone exactly what you should be looking for. And that's as you get constantly better and the results are completely objective. You can say at the end, like, did it end up good or bad in my own mind? Okay, good. What did I do right? Oh, I did this right. And you practice that more and more and more. And that's the fun bit. The fun bit is I'm not interested in, telling some amazing story in documentary form where you're just there capturing things. The joy for me is, given the worst situation where I would never want to be filming here in a million years, can I overcome it and get something that I would be happy with? Can I set up all the dominoes so that all I have to do when we're on set is just push one and they all fall in exactly the same way that I had anticipated that they would fall. And in the end, ta-da, we get this beautiful image that I'm happy with. That's the fun bit. And in order to do that, I have realized more control is better, even though there's a larger opportunity for you to screw that up. At least it's me screwing it up. In this scenario, if you're not happy with the final look, the ratios between here and here, guess whose fault that is? 100% yours, or in this case, mine. And I'm happy. I'm fine allowing me to screw things up. I don't want to allow the circumstances to screw things up for me because I didn't plan for it. It's like if I could have gotten around it and I didn't, then I feel bad. If I could have gotten around it and didn't because I wasn't very good at manipulating the exact percentages or the exact ratios, okay, well, that's something I can immediately improve on. It's like I can practice that. I can get better at that bit. And that's exactly what I want to be doing with my time in order to see, that little 1% increase in skill over time. So do yourselves a favor. If you want a little cheat code, just have that on standby all the time. I mean, I would have that almost over any other light source, almost over your key. I would rather have that ambient management because we can find spots like in the room if you're super flexible with your plan. I want to be able to throw ambient wherever and whenever I want, at whatever level that I want, at whatever color that I want. Those are the little game changes where you're like, I will never have the same sort of process on set now that this tool is available. It's the thing that makes the biggest difference in my day-to-day work as a cinematographer is this one little toy, this one little trick. And I think it could be helpful for you as well. Okay, that's going to do it for this one. If you are interested in the advanced cinematography course, definitely check out the link in the show notes page or in the description below. And many thanks, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye.